Spider-Man. What the fuck was that Spider-Man? It's a no-brainer that over the years, Spider-Man has had various interpretations in various forms of medium, and one of those mediums always happens to be a cartoon, and most of us remember fondly of the 90s cartoon, or even Spectacular Spider-Man, and just recently we've hit a little bit of a bump in the road with interpretations of the character with like the new Spider-Man series, where he's like dabbing or doing something, as well as the Ultimate Spider-Man that's just totally all over the place. But I think there's one particular series that often gets overlooked until you at least see an image of it, or you go to like your nearest Food for Less or Albertsons and you just happen to stumble upon the DVD on your way to the checkout line. And of course I'm talking about Spider-Man, the new animated series, or aka MTV Spider-Man. Starting to get pictures in your head now, are you? Yes, now that I'm jogging your memory, you're starting to recall a very short-lived animated version of Spider-Man following the success of the very first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. In fact, this debuted back in 2003 when it was becoming really hot with the whole intellectual property of not just Spider-Man, but pretty much anything that's Marvel-related for a very key demographic centered around young teens. And what better network to put this thing on than on the network that is very much aimed at young teens, MTV.
Best dressed? Please, the girls got hips like snack trays.
They started to kind of take some pages out of Sam Raimi's film and kind of work their way into something brand new for that new audience that's just got walked out of the new Spider-Man movie and thought to themselves, holy shit, we need a brand new show like this before that would kind of satisfy our hunger before the next one came out. But hey man, it's the new millennium. Who needs pencils and paper and paint and stencils and all that shit? Let's just do it on the computer, man. We'll just do it on the computer. And plus, we got Spider-Man 2 coming out in 2004, so we gotta hurry this shit up. Let's CG animate this shit. So, Spider-Man, the new animated series, debuted in the summer of 2003 in a span of 13 episodes that released like every other week or every 2 to 3 weeks or so, which is a little bit of an iffy schedule to begin with, but it is MTV. They gotta fit in their reality shows and all that. Plus, at the time, CG animated shows weren't necessarily the most budget-friendly things to produce because it is the early 2000s, so you need to account for inflation, you need to account for exactly how far the technology was that far in advance to be able to produce these things at a rapid rate. So it was spanning over 13 episodes, and considering I missed it this entire time, I finally caved in and watched all 13 episodes, but there was a little bit of an issue. I started watching the show, right? And about a third of the way through, I noticed that a certain character was meeting another character for the first time, and then another character who had a very unfortunate fate just popped out of nowhere before that fate even transpired, and I thought to myself, what the fuck is going on? Why are these things out of order? Why am I watching it right? They're numbered right. I'm looking at my computer and it says episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm like, what's going on? Apparently, the show faced so many production delays that they actually aired the episodes out of order. Holy shit, that would have been a tumultuous thing to do back in 2003, being an avid fan of the movie and going into the show with high expectations, and then realizing that one episode has the death of a certain character, and then the next episode, or 2 episodes down the line, they pop out of nowhere alive, or this bad thing that happened to them is just fine, or certain relationships get undone, and it just throws all that out of whack. And my initial feeling is this is not exactly the best impression that you want to make. So let's see if maybe I can play treasure hunter here with plot points and piece them all together to figure out whether or not this show was deserving of my time. After finally decrypting the puzzle piece that was the order of these episodes, I figured out that this was actually a show that is loosely based on that original Spider-Man movie in 2002, but never exactly had the intention to be like a connective tissue for Spider-Man 2 to come out in 2004. So nothing that happened at the end of this show, or at least at the end of the season, was exactly going to connect into Spider-Man 2 when that came out later that next year. So it was going to take certain little details and elements from that original movie and to kind of use that as a stepping stone to kick things off. And I'm like, okay, I can kind of appreciate that here, because there's little context clues here and there. For one, they're in college, they're not exactly in high school. And then in my opinion, the biggest detail of them all that they carried over from the movie is that Harry Osborn has the biggest, most vile hatred towards Spider-Man for seemingly killing his father. So obviously that's going to be the big thing to take away from the ending of Spider-Man. So they took that and carried it over here, as well as the off again, on and on, really bumpy relationship between Peter and MJ, trying to figure out exactly what they are after the scene in the graveyard at the end of Spider-Man. So they took little things and little liberties with those things to kind of make their own thing, and I can kind of appreciate that. And they do the similar thing here with the characters and their origins, whether it be for our central characters or even some of the supporting characters, that you have to give them credit for at least trying to do something new. But the execution is not 100% there necessarily, because some characters come off as either two-dimensional or just leave like a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth. One of the biggest proponents of this would have to be Dr. Curt Connors, aka the Lizard, who makes an appearance in this show, and this is not exactly the Curt Connors that you remember. And like I said, you can give them some credit for being bold to take on a new direction with the character, but it's just a sour shame that this character is kind of a humongous dick in this show. Right off the bat, he's very, very rude to Peter, and he's giving him a hard time without any logical explanation. At least in the movie, you understood, at least in Spider-Man 2, when he did make his appearance, but played by Dylan Baker, you understood why he was giving him a bad time, because he knows that there's potential there for him to be an astounding student, but he keeps missing school. You don't exactly see that similar type of passion within him here. He's just a really brute guy, and you're just like, man, kind of fuck this guy. And sadly, you feel that for not exactly every single character, but for a good chunk of the characters that it took liberties with. And if you're as big a Spider-Man fan as I am, you know that one of the best things about Spider-Man is his rogue gallery of villains that he has to go up against and to kind of balance his life with, in terms of trying to be Spider-Man while at the same time trying to be Peter Parker. You do get a good semblance of him trying to balance college life and his social relationships along with the burden of being Spider-Man, and you constantly see him getting beaten down for that, so that's really well represented. But the villains, on the other hand, it does that whole traditional thing of every episode having a brand new villain. But what I was really surprised with, and again, you can give them some kudos, some points for effort for being bold, by generating their own villains. There's only a handful of episodes that take from the comic books and the original plethora of villains that you're kind of used to. Like I mentioned, the Lizard, as well as a couple of others like Silver Sable and Kraven the Hunter and various others. Even Kingpin makes an appearance here. Played by Michael Clark Duncan, which was a really cool little choice considering that this came out the same year as that Daredevil movie. Say what you will about that film, but I really enjoyed Duncan in the role of Kingpin. I thought that he was also a pretty cool job here as the Kingpin once more. However, in between, there's a couple of episodes where they use original villains that I never even heard of. Either they're original villains, or maybe they were in the comics, but they were only like one issue. They were so obscure that I never even noticed them. So when they appeared here, they were really two-dimensional and kind of bland and very insignificant. Or I'm like, why are we centering an entire episode on this? Furthermore, they kind of retread some things with these villains later down the line where I'm like, why? They were not that big of a deal. I feel like these villains are just, Spider-Man could have fixed these guys easily or taken care of these people easily, and yet we're dwelling an entire episode on just this.
You're way too smart.
What is your problem? Why do you care?
She just bob her head that way. Fortunately, what really surprised me about the season is that by the end, I actually ended up really liking Peter, Mary Jane, and Harry Osborn. By the end, our main trio of characters that are able to anchor the entire show by appearing throughout the majority of it, they actually won me over. I was a little skeptical about their interpretations, and especially the voice acting behind the characters at the very beginning, with Peter Parker being played by Neil Patrick Harris out of all people, and I just didn't feel like his voice matched the character at the beginning. And then we had Harry Osborn, I can't remember the actor's name, but he sounded like a Baldwin actor, a Baldwin brother, so I thought that he was a little iffy. The only one that kind of made sense from the get-go was Mary Jane. She seemed very grounded, But over the course of the episode, I started to like these guys, and I started to care about the things that were happening to them, and they were very likable characters. Harry Osborn, in my opinion, was probably the most surprising one, because he could have easily been a very anguishable character in the sense that he could have dwelled easily so much on the death of his father. And trust me, he holds a very big grudge towards Spider-Man that's carried over from the movie. But what's cool is that he doesn't let that grudge get in the way of his friendship with both Mary Jane and Peter Parker. And he's a very cool guy to see him interact with these two other characters. Likewise with Peter and Mary Jane, where like, wow, you guys are helping the chemistry work. Which is ironic because Peter's often talking about chemistry because of the big nerd that he is. So I'm like, okay, cool character traits that you guys were actually able to keep intact and you didn't completely abandon. And I'm like, you know what, there's gotta be some respect paid there. Especially since, as I mentioned, you care about the things that happen to Peter Parker, especially by the end where you do wish that he would catch a break because he's trying so hard to balance Spider-Man and his college life. It doesn't do it as well as other shows or some of the movies did. I still believe that Spectacular Spider-Man was able to tackle that balance a little bit better, and even the movies did a really excellent job with that. But that's not to say that it should be underrated how they were able to strike that balance here. It's just a shame that I wish that these characters had a better tone and feel for the show to work with, because the tone is at odds with itself at times. In fact, polarizing even. There's moments where the show acts a little overly comedic or overly almost kind of kiddie. Like there's certain jokes and certain things that these characters say to each other that are very much lifted from like Nickelodeon. And then we have an episode where people are getting their heads cut off. And I'm like, yeah, and saying words like damn and hell because we're on MTV. We have to be a little edgier than usual. And it doesn't mix well when you have other scenes that are like a little slapsticky. And it just doesn't click very well. It really, really does not. And it kind of takes you a little bit out of the experience. And a little bit of that is also reflective within the actual visual style of the show. As you can tell, it's a very distinct style rooted in cel-shading CGI technology where they're able to animate these characters to look like they're cartoony, but in reality it's generated through a computer because early 2000s. And much like how I felt with Peter and Harry at the beginning, felt a little off. Certain backgrounds are very bland and generic. There's even a courtyard within the university where some of the grass just looks like blocks of green and there's like no detail in them whatsoever.
Guys, enough with the third degree. You're giving me a headache. Oh.
What the fuck? What are they cooking? Static? And then there's moments where the show would commit the crime of repeating animations. I swear to God, I would see or in this case Spider-Man, swing through the city in the exact same motion. They would use this particular shot over and over where he's like falling from the sky, he's falling towards the camera, he goes like this, and they would use it like twice within the same episode. I'm like, guys, it's not 1960s anymore. It's not Scooby-Doo where you get to reuse the same animation because of budget reasons. It was probably the budget reasons, but it's the early 2000s. You gotta at least try it, or at the very least cut it out. Don't use it over and over again. Just give us the implication in our minds that, oh, he swung from this point to the other. Don't show the shot. If you're gonna repeat the shot, I'd rather, if I was the director, I would rather not just use the shot again. That just feels cheap. And they do commit to that ever so often, as well as some of the action sequences. You expect there to be some really cool action with Spider-Man, and I thought it was a little bland when he went up against these villains, especially the villains that were the original ones that, again, didn't really do it for me because I just thought that they could have been taken out of the equation by Spider-Man so easily, or they just didn't pose that big of a threat, and I didn't think that they were that significant, and that had a rippling effect on the action and the fights that Spidey would have with these characters, because it would just be your usual, grab and go fight, knuckle to knuckle type of fights, and there was nothing really significant or awesome about them, especially when, again, certain animations and certain motions and choreography would be reused. How many fucking times did Spidey web up a car axle or a vehicle axle to stop it? It happened. If you were to take a shot every time that happened in this show, you would get plastered. I mean, our characters constantly drinking coffee, supporting their caffeine addiction. It makes sense. It's a running joke, and I feel like I can sympathize because I'm a college student. But why the hell is everybody using the same goddamn phone? But once again, surprisingly, as I continued to watch the show, by episodes 8 or 9, it grew on me, and I was able to get past it. It didn't faze me anymore. And this all leads to a 2-part finale that had some cool elements and good uses of certain powers, especially done by these villains that I think were original, unless I can go on Wikipedia and ends up turning out that they were from the comics. But these villains were actually a little clever. You know, they were a little unconventional in the sense of how they went up against Spidey, and they did some things that were bold, but they actually ended up paying off because besides our trio, there were a couple of other characters that I did look at and go, you know what, that was pretty good. I like this character. And so when they started to use some different things and did certain decisions towards the end where something happened, and I was eating at the time, I was eating an apple, and this thing happened, and I literally went, oh shit, they went there. They just did that. And if they were able to at least move me to that point, I figured, you know what, I think you guys did something right. The season 1 finale even ends in a typical cliffhanger for a Spider-Man show, but it still had me intrigued enough to make me look forward to whatever exactly were to happen in season 2. Oh shit. Yeah, apparently Sony did not find the ratings to really justify the amount of time and money going into the CG for the show, and thus after only 1 season, Spider-Man the New Animated Series was cancelled. And therefore didn't really have to worry about any of the events that would supersede in the remaining 2 Sam Raimi Spider-Man sequels. God only knows what MTV Spider-Man would have done with Dancing Emo Peter. I want to see that. So for the time being, I have no choice but to just judge the entirety of the show on the merit of season 1, which, like I said, started off as a mixed bag, making me feel like, what the hell was exactly the direction for the show, because of how not timeless it is, because there's so many facets to the animation or the character dialogue or the design or even the tone that it's exactly trying to strike that was a little at odds with each other because of how they were trying to capture a little bit of the movie while at the same time a little bit of the comic book, and it wasn't gelling 100%. But at least something kind of got created in the fusion of that, and the result was that you got some likable characters, and thankfully those characters were the ones that the show was centered on, with some other little things that I was growing to get used to that created just a little nugget of charm that made me go, you know what, that cliffhanger at the very end of the last episode, I would have loved to have seen that play out somewhat. Maybe not for all the right reasons, but I wanted to see what they would do, just out of sheer curiosity. So I'm going to be giving Spider-Man, the New Animated Series, the entire series, considering it's only 1 season, a very, very high 7 out of 10. I ended up enjoying myself with the show, contrary to what I was expecting, but that's not to say that there's some things in it that are definitely of its time and cannot exactly work outside of that. Especially that goddamn music. Anything that was Spider-Man in the early 2000s needed to have Electro in it, and I'm not talking about Electro the villain, the Electro the music. And it doesn't get any more electro than the main title sequence. Look at this. Stop. I have a way to fix this. Check it out. Go. That's what I'm talking about. So if somehow, some way you guys managed to catch the Spider-Man animated series from MTV back in the early 2000s, please let me know in the comments, what were you guys' fondest memories of checking out the show? I've heard some of you actually enjoyed that show, or some of you maybe have hated it, or maybe have conflicting thoughts about it, just like I kind of, to a certain extent, do. Please post them in the comments below. Make sure you hit the like and share button down below to support the video. There's not that many reviews on the MTV Spider-Man show, so be sure to do that, and it'll probably be one of the first ones when you search MTV Spider-Man here on YouTube, and that'll be pretty cool, and I'll really appreciate it. Also, make sure to support the channel by hitting the subscribe button down below if you haven't already done so. It's free, it's simple, takes 1 millisecond. Test it out. And also, don't forget to follow me on twitch.tv, where I post some Let's Plays. There's some Let's Plays up there of that Spider-Man 2002 video game that I was talking about. You can check them out there. Check out more videos on my channel. And that really about does it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys on the next one. Best TV show moment ever. pressing the same punch buttons or doing the same combos over and over, eventually it wears out thin, especially when you go through like 5 or 6 waves of enemies and you don't exactly know when the level's going to end. It starts to get a little infuriating. Did I die? Oh, wow, I wasn't even paying attention to my health. Goodness gracious. Oh, for that fucking sake.